I never saw it coming. One moment, I was walking into the office, nodding at colleagues, laughing at trivial jokes, believing I was indispensable. The next, they told me I was redundant. Redundant. The word echoed in my head like a hammer. My chest tightened. My years of loyalty, my sweat, my sleepless nights, my sacrifices, dismissed with a single, cold memo. They smiled politely, handed me the termination letter, and turned away. But what they didn't know, what no one could have predicted, was that I held the one thing the company could never operate without, the license that ran everything. The morning began with an ordinary rhythm, almost painfully mundane. I walked into the office, briefcase in hand, coffee still warm, exchanging polite nods with colleagues who seemed absorbed in their own worlds. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a subtle reminder of routine, but beneath the surface, a tension lingered, thin, almost imperceptible, like the static before a storm. I tried to shake it off, attributing it to my own fatigue from the late-night work sessions. After all, I had been the backbone of this company for years. Without me, their entire operational system would collapse, I thought. I prided myself on being reliable, indispensable even. "Morning, Sam," Jenna greeted me, a practiced smile in place. But there was something in her eyes, hesitation, maybe even guilt, that sent a cold shiver down my spine. I forced a smile in return, ignoring the nagging feeling that something was off. My steps echoed in the corridor as I passed cubicles. Faces that once lit up with recognition now glanced away, whispers catching midair. It was subtle, but it was there, and it made my chest tighten. By 10, my boss, Mr. Connors, called me into his office. The door clicked shut behind me, the sound final, sealing a sense of dread that had been slowly building all morning. He didn't smile. He didn't make small talk. He just sat behind the polished desk, fingers drumming nervously. "Sam," he began, avoiding my gaze, "we've had to make some difficult decisions." His pause was long, deliberate. My stomach churned. "Your position has been deemed redundant." Redundant. The word hit me like a physical blow, reverberating in my chest. My hands gripped the edge of his desk. "Redundant?" I echoed, my voice barely steady. I'm the only one authorized to manage the operational license. Without me, the company cannot function legally. You know this." He shifted uncomfortably, glancing down at the letter in his hand as if it could somehow make the words disappear. We've decided to move in a different direction." A tight knot formed in my throat. I couldn't speak. All those nights spent troubleshooting issues no one else could, all the sacrifices, all the loyalty, it meant nothing. The office I had poured my heart into, the colleagues I had trusted, even the friends I had confided in, had discarded me with a perfunctory memo and a polite nod. I left the office, walking past familiar desks and faces that no longer looked at me with recognition, only pity or discomfort. The elevator ride down felt endless, each floor a reminder of what had been taken from me. When I reached the lobby, the cold morning air hit my face, sharp and unforgiving. I felt a mixture of rage, disbelief, and heartbreak. Alone in my apartment that evening, I sank into the couch, staring blankly at the wall. Memories of loyalty, laughter, and camaraderie flooded back, mixing with the sting of betrayal. My chest tightened with grief and anger, but beneath it all, a small spark of reassurance glimmered. They had made a fatal mistake. They didn't realize that their mistake was not just personal, it was strategic. I held the one key they could not operate without, the license that governed everything. And in that quiet moment, I began to plot, quietly, carefully, knowing that their day of reckoning would come. The morning after my termination, I didn't rush to call anyone. I didn't post angry words on social media. I sat quietly in my apartment, listening to the hum of the city below, tasting the bitter coffee I hadn't really wanted, feeling a strange mixture of anger and cold determination. From the window, I watched the office building rise against the morning sky, unaware of the storm that was quietly brewing. They had dismissed me, but they didn't know what they had unleashed. I began to notice the subtle cracks almost immediately. Emails I had never seen piled up on shared accounts. Reports that should have been seamless now contained errors. My colleagues, the same ones who had once joked and confided in me, now stumbled in their work, fumbling with tasks they had never been trained to handle. I knew the license, they assumed it was just a formality, was critical. Without my authorization, nothing could run properly. And already, tiny sparks of panic were lighting up the corridors I had once walked with confidence. By late morning, the first calls came. From Connors himself, the tone clipped but anxious. "Sam, we're having issues with the license," he said, voice tight, betraying a hint of desperation. "We need your guidance. Things are not working." I held the phone in my hand, letting the silence stretch, feeling the weight of power finally shifting back into my hands. They hadn't considered the consequences of their actions. The arrogance of dismissing me had blinded them. I could almost hear the scrambling, the whispered panic as teams tried to make sense of processes that I had single-handedly overseen. "I'll help," I said finally, my voice deceptively calm, soft, measured. "But it won't be easy, and it won't be free." There was a long pause. I could almost hear Connor's thoughts racing on the other end. Then he stammered, What do you mean?" "You fired me," I replied, letting the words cut through the tension like a knife. "You assumed I was replaceable. You assumed the license was just paperwork. It isn't. And now, you've realized your mistake." The line went silent for a moment, heavy with disbelief. Panic was creeping into the voices I had once known as casual and confident. We're ready to negotiate," he finally whispered. I hung up, allowing a small, private smile to form. It wasn't cruelty, I wasn't simply exacting revenge. It was justice. Years of betrayal, of being overlooked, of being treated like expendable office furniture, were finally being acknowledged in a way they could feel, in a way they could ignore. Over the next few days, I watched as incompetence exposed the fragility of their operations. Missed deadlines, confused employees, frustrated clients, it was like watching a slow-motion collapse from a distance. And each moment reinforced one undeniable truth: they had underestimated me. They had ignored my worth, and now they were paying the price. From the shadows, I had regained control. Every anxious glance in the office, every whispered conversation about the problem with Sam, became a testament to their recklessness. And all the while, I remained calm, patient, collecting my leverage like a predator stalking the perfect moment to strike. The storm hadn't hit yet, but the air was thick with the tension of what was coming. Word of my absence, combined with the company's sudden operational failures, spread like wildfire. Whispers traveled faster than memos, and rumors painted me as both villain and savior in the corridors. I watched quietly, almost amused, as the people who had smiled over my coffee, shared idle jokes, and patted me on the back now scurried like trapped animals. Panic had replaced their confidence. Their polished smiles were gone, replaced by furrowed brows, hurried conversations, and a desperate hope that someone, anyone, could fix the mess. Then came the audit. The first major one since I had left. I knew immediately it would be a disaster. Without my authorization, nothing was legally compliant. Contracts were frozen, operations stalled, and the compliance officers were relentless. The company was a fragile house of cards built on the assumption that I was just another employee. They had underestimated me, and now their mistake was poised to implode spectacularly. My phone buzzed incessantly. Emails flooded my inbox. Connor's voice, tight and pleading, finally came through. "Sam, this is critical, we need you. Please, come to the office." I drove in silence, watching the city blur past, the calm before the storm settling in my chest. Every red light felt like a countdown, every turn a step closer to the confrontation I had been preparing for. By the time I entered the building, the atmosphere was electric with fear. I could feel it in the air, hear it in the rapid whispers, see it in the darting eyes. My presence alone seemed to unnerve them. Connors led me to the executive boardroom. The air smelled of expensive cologne, anxiety, and tension. The executives sat stiffly, their postures rigid, hands gripping the edge of the table as though it were a lifeline. they had realized, finally, the depth of their oversight. We underestimated your value," Connor stammered, eyes shifting between guilt and desperation. "I'm sure you did," I replied evenly, my voice calm, almost serene, but beneath it, a current of cold fury ran like ice. "You didn't just fire me. You gambled with the very foundation of this company. And you lost." For the first time in months, I saw the raw vulnerability behind their corporate masks. The people who had once dismissed me now sat exposed, their panic palpable, their confidence shattered. One by one, they pleaded, asked questions, tried to salvage control over a situation they could no longer command. I outlined the path to recovery, but under my terms. Every step, every instruction, every crucial decision required my oversight and approval. This wasn't revenge in the petty sense, it was correction. Justice. They had underestimated me, belittled my contribution, and disregarded my expertise. Now, they had no choice but to acknowledge my worth. As I walked out of the room, leaving them to grapple with their helplessness, I felt a shift inside me. Betrayal had transformed into power. Pain had become leverage. And in that quiet, controlled moment, I understood something profound. Their reckoning had begun, and I was the arbiter. Weeks passed, and my role in the company had shifted from outsider to silent authority. I didn't flaunt it, I didn't make dramatic entrances or issue ultimatums. I simply returned to the office, not as an employee, but as the one holding the keys to their survival. The same colleagues who had whispered behind my back now avoided eye contact, their smiles hesitant, their confidence shaken. Every glance in my direction reminded them that they had underestimated me, and paid dearly for it. I walked past desks that had once seemed mundane, noting the tension in the air. Phones rang incessantly, teams scrambled, and the subtle chaos that I had predicted unfolded exactly as I had expected. And yet, amidst the turmoil, I remained calm. I had waited, observed, and now held all the leverage. The betrayal that had cut so deeply before was now mirrored in their expressions. "Sam," Jenna's voice trembled as I passed her. I looked down at her, noticing the shift in her demeanor. Once confident, now uncertain, her eyes reflected guilt and fear. We didn't see it coming. I didn't realize." "I see it now," I replied softly, almost mournfully, "and I've learned who I can trust." My words weren't cruel, they were measured, precise, like a surgeon's scalpel cutting through pretense. For the first time, I saw their vulnerability, the raw edge of accountability. Betrayal had consequences, and they were feeling every one of them. The confrontation that followed was slow, painful, and raw. Executives who had once wielded authority now pleaded for guidance. Apologies were whispered, eyes averted, voices cracking under the weight of guilt. I listened, absorbing every word, every confession, every attempt to shift blame. There was no joy in their suffering, only the quiet satisfaction that truth had finally surfaced. "Sam," Connor said one afternoon, his hands shaking slightly as he passed me the latest report, I can't believe how much we misjudged everything. Your departure, it almost destroyed us." "You assumed I was replaceable," I said quietly. "You assumed the license, the knowledge, the expertise, none of it mattered. And now you understand. That's the difference between loyalty and complacency. It wasn't about punishment, not entirely. It was about restoration, about teaching them the weight of their decisions, about reclaiming dignity and respect for myself." Each interaction was a delicate balance between power and compassion, between justice and understanding. I saw their panic, but I also saw potential for growth, for recognition, for humility. By the end of the week, the company had stabilized, but under rules I had set. My authority was recognized, my role respected, and the colleagues who had doubted me now approached with cautious respect. I had confronted the betrayal, and the confrontation had reshaped everything. Pain had been transformed into leverage, betrayal into a lesson, and humiliation into awareness. Walking out of the office that evening, I felt the weight of the past months lift slightly. I had reclaimed control, restored my dignity, and ensured that those who had underestimated me could never forget the consequences of their arrogance. For the first time, I felt an uneasy calm, a mixture of satisfaction, relief, and anticipation for what the future might hold. Months had passed since I returned to the office under new terms, and life had shifted in ways I could never have imagined. The company, once teetering on the brink of chaos without me, was now stable, but it was stable on my terms. Every process, every contract, every decision required my oversight. I didn't wield my power recklessly, I wielded it deliberately, a reminder of the trust they had once broken. Walking through the corridors, I noticed the subtle change in my colleagues' demeanor. They no longer whispered behind my back, they approached with careful respect, understanding at last the depth of what had been overlooked. Sitting in my office one late evening, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. The betrayal had cut deeper than I had realized at first, its echoes had followed me home, haunting my quiet nights, replaying in every memory of loyalty ignored. And yet, through that pain, I had found clarity. The injustice that had left me raw and vulnerable had also given me power, patience, and perspective. I had learned to see the hidden motives, the subtle manipulations, the unspoken hierarchies. I had learned to anticipate, to plan, and ultimately, to reclaim what was mine, not just the license, but my dignity, my voice, my authority. Connors approached, hesitating at the doorway. His usual confident stance was replaced by a quiet humility. "Sam. I just wanted to say, thank you. Well, we all owe you more than words can say. Without you, none of this would have survived." I smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and weariness. "Thank you," I replied, though it wasn't entirely gratitude I felt. It was acknowledgement, recognition that the storm I had weathered had transformed not only the company but myself. They had learned a harsh lesson, and I had learned something equally profound: strength isn't about retaliation. It's about endurance, clarity, and the ability to rise above betrayal without losing your integrity. Looking out at the city skyline from my office window, I saw it as more than buildings and streets. I saw the battles fought in silence, the moments of doubt that had tested me, the decisions that had defined my resilience. I realized that justice, when applied thoughtfully, doesn't need to be dramatic or vengeful, it can simply exist in the restoration of balance. They had underestimated me. They had tried to cast me aside. And yet, I had emerged not only unbroken but stronger, wiser, and more capable than ever. The lessons of betrayal lingered, but they no longer weighed heavily. I had reclaimed my life, my role, and my voice. I had turned pain into strategy, doubt into leverage, and injustice into a lasting mark of accountability. And in that quiet moment, I understood fully, survival alone isn't enough. True victory lies in reclaiming your power, in shaping your own path, and in emerging from the darkness with dignity intact. As I shut my laptop and prepared to leave the office, a sense of calm washed over me. The storm had passed. The betrayal had been addressed. And though scars remained, they were a reminder of strength earned, respect commanded, and the quiet triumph of a life reclaimed. And so, the story ends not with chaos, but with quiet triumph. Betrayal had cut deep, leaving scars that could never fully vanish, yet from those scars emerged strength, clarity, and a renewed sense of purpose. What once felt like the end, a sudden termination, the dismissal of years of loyalty, became the beginning of a transformation. I had turned injustice into strategy, pain into power, and betrayal into an enduring lesson. True resilience is measured not by vengeance, but by the dignity with which you reclaim your life. To those listening, remember this: never underestimate your own worth. Stand firm, stay patient, and trust that even when the world tries to cast you aside, you hold the power to rise again. If this story moved you, leave a comment sharing what you would have done in my place. Don't forget to subscribe for more gripping tales of betrayal, resilience, and life lessons, here on Payback Chronicles.